Hi, my name is Emma Schwartz, and I'm the producer and director for Elon Musk's Crash Course.
Elon Musk wanted to revolutionize the auto industry.
He created Tesla's brand around Autopilot.
People are going to assume the car does more than it can.
There were crashes taking place while Autopilot was in use.
Is Tesla an example of scientific integrity and public responsibility? It is not.
How much do you push the edge of the envelope?
This is Factual America. We're brought to you by Alamo Pictures, an Austin and London-based production company making documentaries about America for international audiences. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. This week it is my pleasure to welcome Emmy-winning journalist and filmmaker Emma Schwartz. Emma is the director and producer of Elon Musk's Crash Course, the latest in a series of films from the New York Times Presents. Based on reporting by New York Times journalists Cade, Metz and Boudet, the film zeroes in on Elon Musk, the world's richest person and CEO of Tesla, and his claims about self-driving cars. A New York Times investigation reveals the quixotic nature of Musk's pursuit of self-driving technology and the tragic results. Elon Musk made his name and fortune taking bold risks and betting on the impossible. But Musk's pursuit of self-driving cars has put him on a crash course with business realities and the limits of technology. Stay tuned as we find out more about what many former Tesla employees have to say about Musk's claims and the culture he has created at the self-described tech company. Is Silicon Valley's era of move fast and break things really over? Emma, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Good, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. No, things are great, and congratulations. Our listeners should have already heard it in the intro, but we're talking about the film is Elon Musk's Crash Course. It's the latest from the New York Times Presents series, premiered on FX and Hulu on May 20th. And in terms of our international audience, I think just Google it. I'm sure it will be coming to you sometime in the near future. But congratulations. I imagine you, the New York Times journalists and others, you've had a busy couple of weeks, haven't you?
Yeah, it was a good experience, very much, and good to see it out.
Yeah, and how's the reaction been?
Well, it seems like it's gotten a lot of attention, which is always good and interesting, and for the most part, I think fairly positive.
Yeah. Well, even before we knew we were going to get you on, I certainly was coming across it on my perusal of social media and elsewhere. So thanks again for coming on to the podcast. Why don't you tell, for those who haven't seen it yet, what is Elon Musk's Crash Course all about? Maybe give us a synopsis.
All right. So the film is about, obviously, Elon Musk, but it's about Elon Musk and Tesla's attempt to create a self-driving car, right? This has been a dream in the sort of technology world for a long time. And, this effort comes up against literally crashes with the, assisted driver system. And so we peel back what we can learn from the first fatal Autopilot crash in the United States that killed a man named Josh Brown. And what does that tell us about the promises that Silicon Valley and Elon Musk have sold us? And, ultimately, how safe are these systems that are starting to come onto the road?
Yeah, and we'll be talking more about this over the next few minutes, but like you said, I'm not a big car enthusiast or not even a big Musk follower, but it seems to me I've been hearing for ages now that we're just a year or two away from all being in self-driving cars somehow. So it's I think it's very interesting. This is building on New York Times investigations that have been done over the last few years. Is that right?
Well, there's been reporters at the Times, obviously, who followed Elon Musk and followed Tesla over the years. And, when we started with the group, we were talking about, what should we look into? And there's a lot of interest in, Elon Musk, right? He's in the headlines every day. Some people think he's, sort of going to save humanity. And other people think he's, a con man, and trying to figure out, okay, well, what can we add to this conversation? What can we help people understand about one of the, richest and ultimately in many ways, most influential people on the planet today, right? And I think we didn't really want to look at just sort of a straight biography. And we started looking at, all of the different endeavors that he's taken on. And really, the self-driving effort is one of the ones that's gotten so much attention and had so many questions that seem to both, affect the public good, but also look at how does this man operate, right?
Yeah.
And, as I started to hone in on that, one of the reporters at the time, Cade, Metz, he started writing about, this full self-driving, and we started to collaborate on, developing sources and pushing that story forward, and really, taking a long view at, what we had seen as sort of drips and drabs over the years to understand, well, what's happened to those promises we were all hearing, 5-10 years ago, that self-driving cars were going to be on the road, and that Elon Musk is, even to this day, still saying are happening, in the next year.
Yeah. And so that says a lot of something I'll maybe raise later about the sort of collaborative approach between what you do and then the actual New York Times journalists, which I find very interesting, even personally. But what are your, I mean, I don't want to give away, do spoiler alerts. People should watch the film. But what are the main findings of, in terms of the investigations you've done looking at this?
So, I think there's findings and then there's still questions, right? And
Yeah.
I think, one of the things that we learn is, clearly Elon Musk and Tesla have been over-promising the capabilities of the system. And that, even as Elon is saying, we're just going to have, self-driving cars around the corner, there were people inside the Autopilot unit who had a lot of questions, both about what was being sold, but even about the basic technology that was being put into these systems, right? And that has been a pattern over many, many years. We also, showed the ways in which government investigators have highlighted some pretty key deficiencies in the way that the system has been put together. It allows cars to be used on roads that the technology isn't designed for, without restrictions, or at least with very few restrictions at first, and even the restrictions that have been put in since haven't met the recommendations of the government investigators. And there's a very weak system of keeping a driver engaged, right? When we get into technology, right, when we start using automated systems, we kind of zone out, right? We forget they're there. We almost think they're better than they can be. And this, when you combine that with a big vehicle driving on a road at a very fast pace, can be a really dangerous thing. And, there's decades of research that says you got to keep the people involved. You can't lull them into thinking it's better than it is. And this system, didn't keep drivers very active, and even to this day hasn't met the recommendations of the government, right? And it also tells you, well, the government hasn't been able to force them to do anything either. But that certainly raises a lot of questions about what are the values and the principles of a company that doesn't even respond to government investigators when they're saying, hey guys, like, we've got literally dead bodies here.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe the first, well, there's a lot to unpick there, but I guess maybe one of the first things is that the driver's assistance system is called Autopilot. Isn't that right? So we have what is that? I mean, we have this concept of autopilot that I guess literally planes aren't literally flying themselves. There's obviously two pilots in the cockpit, but that in and of itself tells you, at least gives the impression that it's more than just, that you don't need to have your hands on the wheel and this sort of thing.
Yeah, so the name is sort of almost like the first question, right? Yeah. And, some people will say, look, the reason why Tesla and Elon wanted to use the name Autopilot is because technically in a plane, a pilot is supposed to be engaged, right? Which is technically true, but you have very trained pilots who have to go through training to do this. There's two of them, right? It's not just you and me jumping in a car. And in fact, when this autopilot technology in planes was introduced, there were crashes and there were problems for exactly the same kinds of reasons that, we're seeing problems with the advanced driver assistance, because the pilots thought, well, oh yeah, the plane can, move so it can handle itself. But I think when you and me hear the term autopilot, we think like automatic, right? That's how our brains work. And that has been something that, people have criticized for many years, but Tesla and Elon have stood behind saying, well, okay, that's not what we mean. But I think we all know language is really important because it affects how we perceive things. And especially because most people, don't go into the fine print. And it's not just the initial package Autopilot. Since 2017, they've been selling a software called full self-driving, right? Like that to me says, okay, this car can drive by itself, right? Pretty much anywhere. I think that's what anyone who doesn't know about the technology would think. And by everyone's admission, it's not full self-driving. And so it's not just sort of, okay, there was Autopilot, there was a misunderstanding. They made yet another package that says it's something it's not.
Yeah, I don't want to make light of this either, actually. But the one thing that struck me was that this sounds like, because it's what, $10,000 extra to get this full.
Unless you bought it on sale, but yes.
Yeah, but so it's $10,000 extra, and you get the hardware knowing that the software isn't up to speed yet. Is that so? It's the promise that this will eventually work.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's what, Cade sort of said in the film, which I thought really encapsulated the idea well, is that you're buying a promise. And look, there's a pattern and a history that, Tesla had sold ideas. It had sold roadsters before they even built roadsters, right? They only had a prototype. And so there's some conceit that in Silicon Valley, these things happen, but, you're selling a little bit, you're selling a promise that's a long way off. And, I think the conceit was, okay, the cars have all the technology, the hard technology that we need. But as we've seen, they didn't, right? Because the technology, the cameras, the computer that were in the car at the time that Elon promised that have been changed, which, some could say, hey, that's a good thing, right? They're putting in better technology. But it also means that the words that he said at that time ultimately weren't true. Whether he knew that would be the case or not at that time is certainly a question. But clearly there were some people at the time who, didn't think it would be.
It does sort of remind me of something that was said about one of our presidents, but it's almost like he's a Teflon CEO. These things don't stick. Obviously there are investigations and you've well documented, and government, as you said, then NTSB and others have taken him to task, but it doesn't seem there's something about the Tesla culture of the fan base, maybe is the best way to put it, or not, that really just they see what they want to see. Is that fair enough way of describing it?
I don't think you could say every single fan doesn't see limits and challenges, right? When you start talking to people, there is some diversity there, but yes, there is a group of very, very rabid fans who essentially believe what Elon says, right? And I think it would be hard to imagine a company and a technology that came about without Elon in this way, without somebody like Elon, without somebody with this sort of, cult of personality and power to get his message across, directly through social media. And, it is pretty remarkable that basic facts seem to be in dispute, right? But that's part and parcel of our world today, right? He's not the only one who is out there with a major following in this world. That can just sort of say things and people believe them, whether or not they're based in fact. You see this right now with like the Twitter debate, right? Or the attempted acquisition of Twitter, where, Elon is saying, well, we just need to sort of do a quick sample to see how many bots there are because I'm worried about the number of bots. And then, you look, is that really a statistical sample? And is that even the reason why he really is questioning pulling out, right? But for some people, that's just truth, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting point. Your film touches and rightly so zeroes in on these claims about self-driving technology and the unfortunate crashes and deaths that have occurred. But it says a lot about so many other things. Which, there's been other films about Silicon Valley and these sort of things that you even mentioned them in the film, but. This whole combined with the social media element, I think, is an interesting, probably in that way, very unique. As you say, it's not just, I mean, it's not just you and working with New York Times journalists, but you do have these former employees who you've got quite a few, actually, in the film, who are all in that almost all of them were in the self-driving division. I know you also get John McNeil, the former Tesla president, to on camera as well. But these are you get the engineers, the designers. I mean, is this almost career suicide to come out and say some of the things they're saying? But they themselves, and also there's no, how put it? They're very typical engineers and designers, aren't they? I mean, they this is the way it should be, and they're not the type to throw their hands up and start screaming and shouting about how things have been done, but they do recognize that they've been uncomfortable with how this has all been rolled out, aren't they?
Look, I think by nature, like, engineers tend to be careful and precise and meticulous personalities, yeah. Right? They're putting things together, and they have to be really careful. And you sort of see that concern arise when they see a system that doesn't have that logic that they would expect as these sort of rational, types, right? But you mentioned, okay, was it sort of career suicide? I mean, look, there was many, many more people that I reached out to, that Cade reached out to, that we spoke with, right? Who were not in a position where they felt like they could speak publicly. And I think, having those kinds of conversations with, far more than unfortunately we could get into in the film, I think gave us the confidence to understand that this wasn't just sort of like one bad apple who used to work there who's upset, right? There's a lot of people. And there's still some people who have some belief and got a lot out of being at Tesla, even if they have concerns, right? It's a company that's known for hiring lots of young people. And so there is a great benefit when you're coming into, an industry to be able to move up the career ladder much faster, to have someone who can motivate you to try to achieve something you couldn't, right? They still learn things sometimes, but some of them got really, really concerned, as you can see with Raven or Akshat. I think the people who were willing to talk were at a place, sort of personally and professionally, where they, both felt like it was the right thing to do. In the case of several of them, they've started their own companies. And so they're kind of risk-taking entrepreneur types themselves who were in more of a position to be open and candid than people who went to work for a competitor. Right? Because even if some of the competitors have concerns about the level of the technology, and obviously you take that, with some level of skepticism, they didn't want to be out there publicly, bashing Elon or Tesla either, right? There's sort of this quiet murmuring rather than, there's an occasional burst, right? But it's not like, they're happy to have their ex-Tesla employees on staff go out and speak publicly.
I think this brings us, or at least for me, brings us to a point where we've already mentioned the U.S. government's response to us, but I must have to admit I'm a bit confused because we've got the former NTSB officials, former head of the NTSB saying all the right things, and publicly taking Tesla to task for being the one automotive company, at least in the U.S., who's not following the recommendations about self-drive. But yet we've got this 2020 NHTSA report that seemed to exonerate Tesla. So it's kind of this, where, how does that all fit together?
Part of the challenge here is you have this alphabet soup of government agencies that are involved here, right? Before getting into the details, like NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, they're the regulators. Like, these are the guys that have power to actually change things. But in order to change things, they need a lot of evidence and a lot of data. And also, I guess I would say a little bit of sort of confidence, right? In someone who's got the will to push something. And on the other hand, you have the NTSB, which are these investigators whose primary mission is to figure out, okay, what's the safest thing that you can do? What really happened? But they have no power, right? They can just suggest things. Now, most companies and, most of the time what they suggest is, picked up by companies and by government officials. And, part of what regulators have publicly looked into this was the first time of the Josh Brown investigation. And at the time, there was two things. One, it was the first known fatal crash in the United States. And there was some additional data showing that there were other crashes, right? Those 38 other crashes. But there wasn't tons and tons of data that would meet the high bar, at least according to the government officials. And also they were rushing to get this done because this was the end of the Obama administration. And I think there was a fear that, when Trump came in, things wouldn't happen and nothing might have come out at all about the Josh Brown crash.
All right, I think that takes us to a good point here to give our listeners a little break. So we'll be right back with Emma Schwartz, director and producer of Elon Musk's Crash Course, latest in New York Times Presents series, premiered on FX and Hulu on May 20th. You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Alamo Pictures to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America.
In terms of taking your eyes off the road, 30 seconds is an eternity.
I really feel like we've struck a great balance between improving the safety and improve the usefulness.
I remember Elon talked about how it was going to be the radar that was sort of first rank or priority one.
We're making much more effective use of radar.
I just thought, radar's been around for 75 years. If they could do this now, why didn't they do it before? I think the timing was significant. I mean, it was right after this tragic accident, and they were trying to make it sound like we got this under control.
Obvious question I have to ask, would the improvements have mitigated or saved, say, Josh Brown's life?
We believe it would have.
And so the truck would have been seen by the radar only and braking would have been engaged?
These things cannot be said with absolute certainty, but we believe it is very likely that, yes, it would have.
Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with award-winning journalist and filmmaker Emma Schwartz, director and producer of Elon Musk's Crash Course. Latest in the New York Times Presents series, it's premiered on FX and Hulu on May 20th. It's already made quite a splash. I'm sure if you've been paying attention to the news, you've certainly come across this. I mean, we've been talking about the self-drive technology and what Elon Musk has said and not said. Well, not so much what he's not said, but what he said and the promises he's made. And, how much of this is Musk and how much of this is Silicon Valley? Because, I mean, you referenced Theranos, and we know about fake it until you make it and move fast and break things. Is this Musk, or is this just how Silicon Valley rolls?
I mean, I think it's a bit of both, right?
Yeah.
Because clearly there is this sort of fake it till you make it mentality in Silicon Valley. On the other hand, Elon Musk is someone who's made it, right? He's made multiple companies that have sold. He's made cars. He's made rocket ships, not personally, but the companies that he's built. And I think what's different here is Elon Musk is like a household name, right? He's a man with this huge following. We've talked about that, right? Yeah. But his promises have a different weight than, another founder who's saying it to a venture capitalist to raise money. His words resonate with millions of consumers, not just in this country, but around the world. And so when he says something, because he's been successful, right? Step back here for a second. One of the things when we started getting into this film, right, is, Elon is a guy who's defied conventions, right? He started a car company when people said, we haven't had a new car company in decades, into becoming a successful car company when nobody had, startup car company to, the big leagues, right? He's, helped found a rocket company, right? So he did things that people thought were crazy. And so, when you get into this technology and Tesla and the attempt at creating self-driving car, he's using technology that other people think is, well, not enough to be robust or safe enough. And you have to ask that question, okay, well, does he know something that the rest of us don't because he's defied conventions? And, as sort of we got into it, it was just harder to say, well, okay, maybe he's right again, defying conventions here. And, you got to wonder, is he someone who's had so many successes that he just assumes the next thing will be a success? Whereas we're all prone to having failures even after we've succeeded, right? And I think that can be harder to acknowledge and understand when you've been so successful, right? One of the we went through a lot of archive, and there was this line that kept kind of sticking out to me every time I would sort of come back to it on paper or in the timeline. And that was where Elon talks about, sort of wishful thinking, and that, even he is sort of falls prey to that we all want to believe something's true, even when the facts on the ground sort of make it seem like that's probably not going to be true. And I couldn't help but wonder, is this one of those cases for him? And, how significant that is given his sort of outsized influence on sort of public opinion. So
that's, I mean, I know I'm not trying to put words in your mouth or his mouth, but I mean, there is this, because as you said, it's not like he's a bullshit artist. He's backed up, he's, like you said, he's started up many of these companies. He's backed it up. I think, if we're going to compare, it's not like an Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos where she flat out knew what I guess it's still, the case is still going.
So here's the thing: we don't actually
know what he's thinking, right?
So we don't know how much he knows about how good the technology is, and we know that there's people who've raised questions about the technology. What he said publicly is he certainly believes it, right? But you're at a point right now where you've got to wonder how you could not recognize the challenge he's up against. And one thing happened, recently, and this is sort of a little bit in the weeds here, but he's promised for years that, Teslas are going to be like robo-taxis that help make money, right? That you can buy one and make money off your car. I mean, like, we think we buy a car, it's like it loses money as soon as you drive it off the lot.
Exactly.
And he's been like, oh no, it'll turn into a self-driving taxi, and when you're not using it, you can make money. And recently, just this year, he said, well, we might be creating like a separate robo-taxi, like something different. And like people in the sort of like Tesla self-driving universe said, oh, wait, is that Elon trying to pivot from this idea that all these cars have the hardware necessary for full self-driving? And does he realize he needs to try something different? And, is that sort of his way of spinning that he has a new product rather than admitting that the product that he has out there hasn't met the promises that he said it would have, for years. So I really wonder, how much, what really is going through his head and what those motivations are. Right. But, so you're saying, okay, no, we can't say he's exactly like Elizabeth Holmes. He hasn't been charged with crimes, convicted of crimes. Like, there's a difference on that level from what the government has done and what we know publicly. But I think there are some real questions about, what does he really know about how capable the technology is and how much he's sharing with the public.
But I think, one of the many things your film does so skillfully, there's that section towards the end, again, spoiler alerts, but where you, you basically say, you pretty much have, I'm sure it's not every example you could have been, the whole film could have just been him saying we're 2 years away from this technology being, and he's been saying that since what, roughly 2016 or so, or maybe even sooner, earlier. So he's an intelligent man, so he knows that if he's been saying it's only 2 years away, and now 6-8 years on, it still hasn't happened, he's got to be doubting it. I mean, there has to be some, and as you pointed out, maybe that's the reason for the potentially a pivot, but he's got to realize, that something's not working here.
Yeah, he'll say publicly, right? Like, oh, my timelines are off, but I always believe them when I say them. But I guess I would have a hard time like saying that with a straight face if that were me, because I would look back and say, oh, well, I guess I was wrong there. And, maybe I was too ambitious. And he has acknowledged that it's harder than he thought, but he's still out there saying it's happening this year.
Yeah. And what do you think? I mean, because, obviously your background as a journalist, and then obviously a documentary filmmaker, and you're working with the New York Times journalists on this, but isn't there a little bit of there's a bit of a media buy-in to all this, too, isn't there? I mean, you're doing your part to shine a light, but we've been hearing about no one cries, no one shouts BS, no one says, it's not just Musk. I mean, others can make announcements and say, well, we're going to do this in a couple of years, and it's almost reported kind of as kind of fait accompli, isn't it? I mean, it's I guess what I'm getting is it's almost gets to this, we have this kind of love-hate relationship in our society with technology. We're enamored with it, and it's almost like we want to believe all these things.
Yeah, and look, it's complicated, which is what makes it possible, right? You get in a Tesla and it feels cool, right? Like it's tech. If you're not used to that, like you're like, oh wow, this is neat. Or when you see the car like kind of take over, you might wonder, oh wow, like look what it can do. It can drive. But what even the engineers who are developing this technology have learned is like, just because it can do sort of 80% or 90%, these numbers obviously are guesses, right?
Yeah.
But just because it looks like it can drive some of the time doesn't mean it can deal with the complexity of what human driving really is. And so, I think this is one of the sort of challenges of sort of short-term reporting where things happen and you report them, and versus having a longer view, which longer articles or documentaries are able to have, right? Because you can say, okay, we've seen this over time and it hasn't materialized. And I think that was really at the heart of what we wanted to try to do with this film, was sort of step back from the day-to-day and look at, okay, what have we learned and why does it matter?
And I guess one last question I was going to ask about that. I mean, do you think these tech achievements are possible without the Elon Musks of the world, or the, not to disparage anyone else, but like Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg, these types. I mean, there's these visionary types who achieve things, like you said previously, no one thought anyone would ever start a new car company, and now he's got, he's become the richest man in the world. No one, do your own space exploration. What kind of, we've got Richard Branson here in the UK, but even there, that's nothing compared to what Musk is trying to do. I mean, is there something you need to have this kind of, I don't know, suspension of disbelief in your own self in order to achieve these kind of, or would these things, would these accomplishments, these innovations just take longer if it weren't for people like Elon Musk? What do you think?
I think that's an unanswerable question from any sort of obviously quantifiable sense. But I think if you look at self-driving, right, like obviously nobody has fully achieved it, but there are a lot of other companies out there that are trying lots of different ways. So to say that you have to always overpromise and not acknowledge the limits, I think wouldn't be fair, given that there's other people sort of out there grinding it and looking at it in different ways, right? And it's not to say that there isn't a lot of value in having visionaries who inspire people, right? You even see with some of the people who worked at Tesla in the film, he inspired people to push themselves beyond where they thought they were capable. And that's an important, powerful driver of, technology and development more broadly. But it's really a question of how far do you need to push, and are there other ways? And some people are more public, like Elon. So that doesn't mean there aren't other people out there doing this kind of work as well.
And speaking of which, I mean, I think it gets mentioned towards the end of the film, but realistically, how far away are we?
Well, look, I think all the companies that have been involved in this arena have learned that, what they were saying, and it wasn't just Elon, which is sort of the biggest, boldest kind of voice out there, is, it's a lot harder than they were projecting, right? And maybe other companies realized that earlier. Some of the challenges is that you're dealing with lots of different technology. You have to figure out how it works. And some of it is that artificial intelligence, has its limits today, right? What Elon is trying to do is basically say that you can use cameras and artificial intelligence like a human brain and make a self-driving car. The problem is the level of sophistication of artificial intelligence isn't quite like a human brain. And we're still, the projections now is a decade or 2 decades off, right? At least. And I'm just reciting what other people have told me. And I know that projections have been wrong in the past. So, I'm not holding my breath. I think it was really striking when I saw this, and they kind of look like an airplane, and you see that, and then you're like, wow, this is an idea that has, long legs here, and it could be a long time, if ever. And what we are starting to see is sort of discrete attempts and tests in like closed boxes, right? Inside, Phoenix, right, where there's one operational, where the weather's good and it closes down if the weather's not good, and it's flat and you don't go too fast, and there's constrained environments where the technology might be making inroads. But the idea that you can just step in a car, it's going to take you where you want to go, and that could be anywhere, that's a long way off at this point, for sure.
Yeah. And as you've said, he's got, he may not have said the words, but he has people asking him questions. Well, how far are we from just being able to get in our car, fall asleep, and get to the next destination? And I think he says a couple years away. That was a few years ago. And he's also, and it's only Tesla that's what you've described as, that's looking at it as the AI plus cameras. He's not using these other technologies that the others are saying is almost absolutely necessary for this to be successful. Yeah,
no, exactly. And look, there's something to be said for, if you're going to be creating something new, you have to believe. I think one of the Tesla guys, John McNeil, says you have to almost believe in the impossible, right? And there is some truth to that, right? Like, you have to believe something's achievable that hasn't been achieved to do something new. But the question is, how do you frame that? And how do you tell the public about that when you're, introducing something that you believe will be good, but it isn't there yet?
Okay. Actually, I wanted to ask you, so this is part of the New York Times Presents series. How did this, you've already mentioned how this sort of the project came along. You've gotten involved. You've got a long pedigree, you certainly with Frontline. Is this, for you, is this a longer-term arrangement? And are we going to see more things like this coming from, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what New York Times Presents has been doing and is doing, and what's the vision behind the series?
I think that the goal is to try to tell, important stories with journalistic rigor in a documentary format, right? And, a lot of times when you're putting together a film, you really want to build out characters and have people, and that's oftentimes a slightly different kind of storytelling than you might have in like a news article. And so I think there's been a lot of emphasis try to sort of figure out how can we, look at people that help us bring about, some of these bigger journalistic questions. So, that I think is, one of the key goals, especially as sort of we're moving into this environment where that differentiation between what is radio, what is TV, what is print, right? It doesn't exist the way it used to. It's all about how do you consume information, and what are the different formats, and what is the best way to tell different stories.
And I guess with the use of documentary film and things you can bring to life that you wouldn't be able to in print or online, things. And I thought it was very useful, bringing Josh Brown's friends on camera and to talk about that. And that gave it a certain human element that that does get lost, not intentionally, but just by the nature of the media, medium in terms of print, or a typical newspaper article, even one that's more than a few hundred words. So that's, is this, what I also found interesting is this whole collaborative approach. Because obviously there's been articles, pieces written, and people have taken that, and that's been the basis for a doc or even a short. But this sounds like this was something from the beginning, which was a little bit more collaborative. That it wasn't just purely based on an article, or you were able to, you both were trying to, like you said, tell a story around, or what is something about Elon Musk that we need to look at in a little more focused, and is that something that's the vision for the New York Times Presents, is to sort of this collaborative approach to journalism, really?
Yeah, I mean, every project's going to be a little bit different here, but this is sort of, I think, a story that was sort of kind of sitting there, if that makes sense. And you're starting to sort of, feel like it needed to be told, and there were different, ways to sort of bring that about, and, we worked together to do that. Okay.
Well, I want to thank you for doing that. It's very much appreciated. If people haven't checked it out yet, I definitely highly recommend. It's a snappy documentary. It's only an hour and 14 minutes, so that's and packs a lot in there, and very, very insightful and very very thought provoking. So thank you again for making that. So just remind everyone, we've been talking with Emma Schwartz, director and producer of Elon Musk's Crash Course. It's the latest in the New York Times Presents series, and it premiered on FX and Hulu on May 20th, and will surely be out on some sort of international distribution in the not too distant future, I'm sure. So thanks again, Emma. Very, very much appreciated having you on the podcast.
Thanks so much for your interest, and appreciate it.
One of the huge challenges of the system at the time was trying to differentiate between a truck and a bridge, an overhead bridge. When a truck is parked perpendicular to the road and blocking the way, the system might think of it as an overhead bridge, and so it was safe to kind of continue driving through it.
So just want to give a big thank you to Emma Schwartz, director and producer of Elon Musk's Crash Course, latest in the New York Times Presents series, premiered on FX and Hulu in the US on May 20th, and be on the lookout for it internationally. I'm sure it'll be out there sometime soon, and would love to have Emma on again sometime with one of her next projects. I'd like to give a shout out to Sam and Joe Graves at Intersound Audio in Eskrick, England, in deepest, darkest Yorkshire. A big thanks to Nevin Apaunovich, podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting great guests onto the show. And finally, a big thanks to our listeners. As always, we love to hear from you, so please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas. You can reach out to us on YouTube, social media, or directly by going to our website, www.factualamerica.com, and clicking on the Get in Touch link. And as always, please remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off.
You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.